Parliamentary approval for her Brexit plan would clear the way for withdrawal as scheduled on March 29. But defeat is seen as more likely. British lawmakers are debating Prime Minister Theresa May's deal for Brexit, Britain's withdrawal from the European Union, a vote on the proposal Tuesday evening, potentially a definitive test for the deal and for the battle-worn Mrs May, herself. Mrs May had hoped that 11th-hour assurances from the European Union on the status of the Irish border would sway lawmakers in her favour. But an opinion delivered on Tuesday by her Attorney General, Geoffrey Cox, found that European pledges did not resolve legal concerns. Parliamentary approval of the agreement she negotiated with the European Union would clear the way for withdrawal as scheduled on March 29, reshaping Britain's economy, politics and diplomacy for decades. But defeat, which is seen as more likely, could delay or derail Brexit, and threaten Mrs May's hold on power. If Parliament rejects the deal, lawmakers would pivot to other votes later in the week, including whether Britain would leave the bloc without any kind of agreement, a so-called no-deal exit. Prime Minister Theresa May's prospects of winning the crucial vote were dealt a significant blow Tuesday morning when the Attorney General, Geoffrey Cox, said that the extra assurances she had negotiated with European leaders did not fundamentally change the legal position. Mr Cox said the concessions did reduce the risk of Britain's being trapped in the backstop, an insurance policy to ensure there is no hard Irish border, and a main issue for opponents of Mrs May's deal. But Mr Cox said that the assurances did not alter Britain's rights and obligations. Were there to be a dispute, he wrote, the country would have no internationally lawful means of exiting the protocol's arrangements, save by agreement. Mr Cox's opinion is likely to be influential for pro-Brexit Conservative lawmakers who had been considering voting for the deal, and his views leave Mrs May's chances of winning the vote on Tuesday hanging by a thread. On Tuesday morning, Mrs May led a meeting of the cabinet and told her senior ministers that passing the vote would allow the country to move on to a brighter future, while the alternative would be uncertainty with no guarantee of what happens next. "Let's get this done," Mrs May said, in comments released by her office. Mrs May has delayed the withdrawal vote time and again in hopes that the looming deadline would pressure critics on both sides to give in. But she faces a very steep climb. Her earlier deal was soundly rejected by 230 votes in the 650-seat parliament. To hardcore, pro-Brexit lawmakers, particularly those in Mrs May's Conservative Party, she has argued that unless her deal is approved, Brexit might not happen at all. The negotiations with European Union leaders late Monday provided some last-minute legal pledges to clarify the temporary nature of the Irish backstop. Mrs May hopes the provisions will be enough to win over Brexit supporters in her own party, but skeptics labelled the assurances too little, too late. To lawmakers who wanted a softer Brexit, or none at all, Mrs May took a different tack, arguing that the choice was between her deal and a potentially chaotic, economically damaging exit without an agreement in place. But allowing a vote on the no-deal scenario may have taken the edge off that threat. Even before the Attorney General had issued his analysis, other legal experts had expressed similar opinions. Apparently, the most that can be said for the changes is that they reinforce the notion that Britain can opt out of European trading rules if officials in Brussels are found to be negotiating in bad faith. In the real world, wrote Michael Dugan, a professor of European law at the University of Liverpool, such a prospect should be considered almost entirely theoretical, if not altogether fanciful. 3 experts in European and international law, commissioned by Brexit opponents to consider Mrs May's last-minute tweaks, wrote in an 11-page opinion, the backstop will endure indefinitely, unless and until superseded by another agreement, save in the extreme and unlikely event that in future negotiations the EU acts in bad faith in rejecting the UK's demands. Mrs May was notably hoarse as she rose in Parliament to defend her deal, a day after her last-ditch negotiation with Jean-Claude Juncker, President of the European Commission. "You should hear Jean-Claude Juncker's voice," she said, but if the timbre of her voice had changed, her message had not, reinforcing Mrs May's reputation for sticking to her script, no matter what. "The government has worked hard to secure an improved deal to address the concerns of this House," she said, drawing a scattering of laughter and jeers. "If this vote is not passed tonight, if the deal is not passed, then Brexit might be lost," she said. To some lawmakers, that sounded like a threat. To others, it is a fond hope.